I'm just excited to bring our first guest on, Bruce Johnson. Again, a retired WSA TV 9 reporter, 3-time author, a man who doesn't even know what retirement looks like because he retired probably long before you were ready. Bruce, how are you?
Hi, Denise. Great seeing you. We go way, way back. I mean,
That's too many ways.
Doing good, doing good.
You know, and you're right. I do want to, I know we want to go down one path, but I have to say that, but, you know, the media business in DC has changed so much. And you're right. There was a time when people really got to know the reporters. You became a part of the family, a part of the community. They built a level of trust, with you. They knew that no matter what community you went to, whether you were uptown, across town, or over here in Ward 8, where there is a distrust of the media, but they trusted you and Sam Ford. There's only 2 reporters that I can think of who were really sort of embedded in the community and made sure you got those right stories out. Was that important to you, and how were you able to build that trust over the years?
Absolutely, it was important to me. It was my first priority when I first came to Washington, March 15th, 1976. 25 years old, youngest television reporter hired in the market up until then. I came here after 4 years in Cincinnati, where I actually started out as a desk assistant, the only Black in the newsroom for much of that time. No photographers, no editors, no writers, just me. I came to DC, and it was my intention to concentrate on wards 7 and 8. As a matter of fact, one of the first projects I did, weeks after getting here, was to move in with a family in the Stanton Dwellings apartments off Stanton Road. And the reason I did that is because this was a part of town that had been separated, in newsrooms. In other words, it was over there. It was called a separate city, and that's what an editor inside the newsroom called my piece, a series of reports. And,
wow.
And while we didn't spend every night with the family, we were there every day for weeks on end. And we put the series of reports on when they were ready. One of the sons got arrested. I went to court with him and talked to the judge and given him probation. I went with the daughter as she looked for a job. There was another son, Black kid who loves rock music, white rock music in this Black R&B neighborhood, and mom who had her own personal issues. It was called The Prices of Anacostia. The name of the family, it was Barbara Price and her family. So, and that just led to other stories. I mean, people saw that. Like in the beginning, it was like, what are you doing over here? And when they realized you're not over there to hurt them, you're not over there to cover the stereotypical stories. Somebody got shot, something bad happened to somebody else, what's going on in public housing, that sort of thing. I covered people in an area that I knew, which is very much like the neighborhood that I had grown up in Louisville's West End.
And that's let's go to the book now, because you tell your life story. You talk about growing up in Louisville, and yes, Shevry's reminded me, because I got the book, so I want folks to see it. It's a great. Let's do it right. Where there you are. I don't know how to use these cameras, but anyway, it's a great photograph. I love the title, Surviving Deep Waters. And so tell us, first of all, why you decided to title it The Surviving Deep Waters.
The title comes from really the neighborhood that I grew up in for a number of years in Louisville. There was Chickasaw Park, where we played, and at one time it was owned by a segregationist and stuff, a guy who had favored the Confederacy. But at some point in time, the city of Louisville kind of turned that over to us, Black people, who lived in the area. And alongside Chickasaw Park ran the Ohio River. Okay, and on the other side of the Ohio River, is Indiana. So I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. That's where we are, Chickasaw Park. We would swing out on the branches, on the banks of the Ohio River, out over the water, not knowing how to swim. What we did know how to do was to dog paddle as quickly as possible back to shore. Don't ask me why at age 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, however young we were, it wasn't 3, it wasn't that young, why we were doing these kinds of things, but it's just what young people do. It was the thrill.
Right.
And the feeling was, and the motivation was, drop like a rock into the water and then haul, back to shore, because if not, the current is going to take you down to God knows where. And that's kind of like how I wrote it. That was a precursor to how I kind of took on life. You know what I mean? Take the risk, one of my lines is, when you don't have much, when you have nothing, you're willing to risk everything. And so it was for the thrill, the excitement, and obviously deep waters. I mean, they occur time and time again. I mean, throughout the life, not just my life, everybody's life. And so there are deep waters everywhere. And so the key is survive and then thrive, if you will.
So I'm trying to figure out now. I don't want to talk too much about what's in the book, because we certainly want folks to pick it up and read it. We're going to talk about how they can do that. But I am interested in Louisville, kid in a Black neighborhood, some other life stories there, and then segueing into media and what that road looked like for you.
Wow.
How did you get there?
A lot of detours, and there's no straight path. I went from growing up in Louisville and the projects, and then single family home with a stepfather and mother who didn't get along, lots of fights, police responding, gun going off in the house, that sort of thing. I went from there to before entering regular high school. I was in seminary for 2 years. My mother sent me away to become a priest in Ohio, to a place she'd never been before, a place she had never visited. And I'm convinced in hindsight, after all these years, I mean, she sent me there to give me a shot, you know what I mean? To give me a chance, and if she had some other place to send, my other, 3 brothers at the time, she would have found a good place for them too, because 2 of my brothers ended up in prison, as did a lot of the guys, who grew up, in those communities. So you come out of the seminary, you finish school. I'm the first in the family to go to college, like a lot of people, first generation. Nobody helped fill out an application. Nobody thought about college. But when you go away to a seminary, which is nothing but a college prep school for young white guys, many of them from wealthy families, you start seeing things, you start dreaming things that you didn't even know you had permission to dream about. So you go to college, you start out at historical Black school, Kentucky State University in Frankfurt, which is where I woke up, and where I discovered, what it meant to be, an African American male. This is after hitting the streets during the riots of 1968, of course.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, so we end up on campus and we're angry. We're angry at everybody. We're angry at our parents for not pushing harder and insisting, that they be given more opportunities and be treated better. And we obviously are angry at the establishment. And our thing in Vietnam was going on. There was civil unrest in the streets. It was an incredible time to be on a college campus. Now, then you fast forward, because I dropped out of school. And there's an incredible chapter on the night I made the decision to drop out of school. I won't give that away.
Wow, right,
but I ended up in Cincinnati in a newsroom because I filled out an application, and the guy at some point in time called me. He hired me and 2 white women at the same time. So we were his, quote, affirmative action program. I don't think anybody would have bet on me at that time. I'm not sure I would have bet on me, but I didn't have another plan. Okay. And I certainly wasn't going to stay in Louisville, given the history that I had there and that my family had there, and the history of that city and the state. So I thought I had died and gone to heaven at some point in time while I was in Cincinnati. They were actually paying me and everybody else in this newsroom to come up with stories, to get into other people's business, and to come up with information that I thought was really important that people had to have, as every young journalist thinks at the time. Now, then at some point in time, you finish undergrad school, you finish grad school, and then I'm out of there. I'm trying to get to Washington. I'm trying to get to Chicago. I'm trying to get to New York. And so I landed up here working for a guy by the name of Jim Snyder, who built the one and only Channel 9, Max Robinson, J.C. Hayward, Gordon Peterson, Maureen Bunyan. Oh my God, Bob Street.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
college. I mean, it was a dream machine, and it was journalism heaven, except I wasn't nearly as good as, the people that were already here. I mean, the standards were so high. I was a good reporter, but I wasn't good at television reporting like these guys were. So I had to learn real quickly. I mean, I had to just work, my rear end off. I learned, as much as possible, as quickly as possible. I leaned on people already here. Your father, Calvin Rolark and others, for the history of this city. Marion Barry was the center of just about everything, shortly after I got here.
And you start the book actually with a piece about Barry, or a piece about Barry. I'll put it that way. And that's an intriguing intro.
It's a backstory that you talk about. There's a lot of, and that was the whole point. Chris Rock said, when you meet me, you don't meet me, you meet the representative, the person I want you to think I am. And that's what people get when they see us on television. You know what I mean? You know, the father sitting there and he can bring his son in and say, see, look at that. You can be able to do that, you know, because he does it. And then that's all fine and dandy. But one of the least told stories, you know, in all of this country's history is what went on in these newsrooms when we started showing up. You know, a lot of issues hadn't been resolved out there, you know, in terms of Black people and are white people going to accept us? And what do you want from us? Are you just looking for tokenism and people to just go out, look like us, but regurgitate what you think and what you need and what your priorities are? There's a lot of that in the beginning. Okay. The whiter you sounded, you know, the more likely you were going to have some success. That changed eventually. And so we started covering our stories, and not just the bad, and because of class and economic, you know, disparities and everything. A lot of bad stuff was happening to our people in our communities, and we wanted to make sure we covered that. And I wanted to tell those stories. You know, I wanted to tell those stories because I wanted to dispel some of the stereotypes, and I wanted to make sure that if something bad happened to one of my people, that I was able to tell exactly how it happened. I wanted to make sure that people understood that most of our people are not poor. Most of our people work every day. We have the same dreams and aspirations of everybody else. Not trying to appease white people, just tell our story, because we have as much right as anybody else to these airwaves. As a matter of fact, Federal Communications Commission at one point in time made stations report in, what are you doing in terms of diversity?
Exactly. I give Biggs credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
When he was there, you know, and you talk about at times, you know, when you came here, you just didn't think you were as good as the others, but you helped your station to win Emmy Awards. And one of those happens to be a story similar to what Dorothy Gilliam talks about in her book, about your own personal experience of hailing a cab in the District of Columbia, and that, you know, what happens with Black people just trying to get a taxi. Want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. That was an incredible story, and that's how I approached every story, because it is television that I'm working for, right? So it wasn't enough to say Black people can't get a cab. Okay, so what? Number one, Black people know that, and white people might not believe it because they just don't know that experience. Okay, so you got to show them, and it's television, so you can show them. So I put Kevin Chavis, good-looking DC council member, out on the street to try and hail a cab. They passed him by. I put the head of the DC Taxi Cab Commission on the street to try and get a cab. She can't get a cab. At one point in time, I put a Black guy who I work with on the street, and a half a block away, I put a white guy right behind him. They're both trying to hail a cab. Cab driver stops for the Black guy, tells him he's not going there. The guy gave him a Southeast DC address, and he stops and he says to the white guy, "Where are you going? Get in," before the guy can even answer. And this is all on live television, those things, you know, and you know, a lot of it was taped also. That demonstrated, you know, what we're talking about. And the Tax Cab Commission had to go back, make some reforms, promise to make changes. And so stories like that, one of the things that I did was kind of change how we covered City Hall. You know, in the old days, everybody, you know, congregate down at the district building, which later became the John Wilson building. We sit in the press room, then we go cover the council, those long, boring hearings, debates.
Which no one goes to anymore, and very few cover anymore.
And it's not because the information isn't good, it's how the information gets out. So one of the things I would do would be go to the streets first and get the issues, or you stop at the council chambers, just maybe to get a soundbite with the council chairman, because you got to do that. And then you go to the streets, and when I say streets, doesn't necessarily mean the streets, but you go to the people that are impacted. If it's a housing issue, you go to somebody, you know, who's being confronted with a housing issue. Whatever the issue, you go and you bring that, you know, to the tube, and that resonated with viewers. As a matter of fact, we became so successful at that the news director of Channel 4 at the time tried to hire me. Came into my home. I'm under contract, but he's trying to hire me. And when he couldn't hire me, he goes and he gets Tom Sherwood, because he's an excellent city street newspaper reporter who knew nothing about television, but he took that because this guy had the credentials. Then, you know, next thing you know, Channel 7 goes and gets Sam Ford, you know, from CBS, who was doing the same kinds of stories. And so it transformed how we were covering our communities. And let me just say one thing before I forget. We were insisting not just that we cover the bad things that were happening to our people. We insisted, and I call them the quality of life kind of stories. PTA meeting, Who's building so and so, who's moving in. How about some diversity in terms of when you go out and you ask people and parents and business people what their needs are and what they're up against? How about covering some of my people in that? Because a lot of times, the white reporters back then, they didn't even think about it. They didn't have a problem coming back with nothing but 10 white interviews, mostly men, and putting those on the air. And we said, no way, we're not going to do. You're not going to get away with that. We're going to start doing that.
But over the years, I mean, you've survived cancer, you've survived a heart attack, you've written about those experiences. You quit smoking, you quit drinking. Talk about how this career affected you physically and why you made those changes.
Let me tell you one thing when it comes to the stress that comes with this job, because it's kind of like professional sports. We're all in there competing, highly competitive. I mean, big money involved. And that was the thrill, the rush, and yes, I came here to make a difference, not just to be average, wanted to be the best. And that's how I approach everything that I do. And it's really a good mantra to have if you're going to come to Washington and go into a newsroom where Max Robinson is sitting there, as the anchor man, and J.C. Hayward, Maureen Bunyan, that kind of thing, because they expected no less. But, one of the things in the crack epidemic is a good example. There's a whole chapter in my book on crack, and it isn't just Rayful Edmond and all that kind of gangster stuff. I cover the crack economy. I cover normal people, who were using crack money to supplement their income and make loans and take care of their kids and blah blah blah. So that's all in there. But one of the things we wanted to make sure of is that we maintained our sanity. A lot of times cops, if they stumbled on the same kind of stories we did, like people shot, multiple shootings in one incident, they would send those cops immediately to the police clinic to be checked out. Okay. With us, you go back to the newsroom, you got applause, you got some Emmys, awards, and then it was like, oh, okay, get back out there. My photographers in this book, open up their diaries to me, and they were covering on any given day, like 2 and 3 shootings where they're there before police. And in our case, these people look like me. These people look like my family members. And then one of the things, and this is one of the things I bring out in this book, we had a new news director who comes in and says, we're going to do things differently. We're not going to cover as many shootings in the projects. As a matter of fact, if you got one crew and you got a baby deer stuck on the ice, and you have another shooting in the projects, where are you going to send that crew? To him, the answer was the baby deer. Okay. More people being interested in that. This is the same guy who would tell reporters to go interview a white blonde from Montgomery County, because that's who people want to see. So that's what we were up against.
And did they use that language, Bruce?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I repeat those stories. And it's even worse than I repeat some of those stories in the book.
Wow. Okay.
I went in and took this as an opportunity to educate this guy as to where he is and who he's talking to. Those are my family members who are out there in the streets. And the problem isn't so much, that we shouldn't cover these stories. The problem is how we're covering these stories. Homicide number 119, 120. You don't tell me who that person is, how they ended up there. I always made a point to try and tell people, who is this person? How did this young person end up here? In most cases, African-American male. And then I would have to go to the mother. And not once did the mother refuse to talk to me about her son, because she was talking about her child.
Well, I want you to talk about you, Bruce. I want you to talk about you, because this did have an impact on you. You had cancer. You had a heart attack. You had to change your lifestyle because of the stress that you were experiencing. How did you make that change, that switch? How did you do that?
Well, first of all, I fall back on my history. I knew what stress. I knew what drinking. I knew what drugs. And there's never so much into drugs. But learn to drink and smoke, in this business. Yeah. And I've seen the impact those things have on our communities. I've already outlived, my father, mother, and that sort of thing. So, and you can't do these things by yourself. I'm a big proponent of when you need help, we are in the Black community, we stuff everything. Oh, fix yourself. Buy the bootstrap, buy quiet, stuff everything. No, not anymore. No, we don't do that anymore. We want to live. We want to thrive. We want to be a part of the community. We want to be a part of the solution. So you do whatever means you need to do. I would sneak out of work. I'm going to divulge this in a chapter of the book. It's one of the chapters where I really got incredibly honest, with my readers. And it's where I think that's when I decided why I'm writing this book. I would sneak out of work early, twice a week to go to this meeting in Bethesda, Maryland. to meet with some people. I'm not going to tell you all the details. To get help to stop drinking, because I had tried to do it on my own, like a lot of people, control, that sort of thing, and I couldn't. Didn't want to go to those meetings, and it was just nothing but grace that kept me going, except I wanted to feel better. I had reporter friends that died out here. Okay.
Yeah.
I had a reporter friend who killed people, out here on the streets. And so I had lessons. Okay. I didn't have excuses. I also had some colleagues, by the way, who were going through the same things. We were all trying to be better. Okay. So that helped me. I haven't been drinking like 32 years, and smoking, same thing though. It was harder to stop smoking. Okay. It's a stressful business.
Yeah.
You never leave, that sort of thing. And so,
so give me a highlight. Give me something that, from the book. I mean, again, you've given us enough to make folks want to go out and get it like right now. And we want to talk about how they can get it, because there's so many great stories in there. But, and but I know what is the best moment, if you could look back over your years in the industry, what's one of those moments that you said, this was a really high time for me, high as in, great, wonderful,
I think, Denise, collectively, you get that when you step away from it. Okay. The climax might have been the pandemic. Okay. When I'm sitting at home and my dining room has been turned into a television studio, and we're having to do an entire newscast like this, read from a prompter. You got a delay in your ear. It's very tough. You're in a pandemic. People are in the streets, and so you're trying to cover it from a distance. You're trying to guide your younger reporters who are covering this. And you realize, number one, that the business is changing. And you realize, again, that young people especially need some guidance at this point in time, because I don't think they're getting it. Okay.
Right.
Again, like when I came in the business, young people don't have that seasoned reporter that they can turn to and get answers to the questions like, is it me or is it them? And that's the question I used to always ask, is it me? And there are times when I could have walked out of the newsroom or gotten myself fired, and I didn't, because I didn't have a backup plan. But young people today, they do have options. They have backup plan, and they're asked to do a lot more than we had to do. They got to feed social media, they got to shoot,
they got to
edit, they got to come up with the stories for a lot less money. So,
but think about those that have to work with me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's really a test of the commitment of what folks, want to do, and how they want to follow in your footsteps. I think this book actually tells, why we do what we do, how we do what we do, but also is a roadmap of surviving deep waters for these new and up and coming journalists. Before we go, I just want you to go ahead and give us a plug, how you can get the book, at the cover. I understand one of our close friends, Ron Baker, took this photograph of you. I'm not sure where you were, but how can we get this book?
Down at the Lincoln Memorial, Ron Baker,
yes,
photographer extraordinaire.
No
and
question.
We went back twice, because he wanted to get these pictures right. And our private conversations were even more important than the picture taking. Just a great man. He and his brother, the Baker boys.
Yes.
So the book is available right now, pre-order online, wherever you go, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, whatever. You could probably type in my name in the search engine, Bruce Johnson, type in the name of the book, Surviving Deep Waters. It's being published by Post Hill Press. It's being distributed by Simon & Schuster. The book you have, came out of my author stash. And because I wanted you to have it, because I appreciate so much what you do, not just now, but what you've done all over the years. I mean, you have like built and rebuilt and just maintained, everything that we're about in this business as journalists. And I really, really appreciate you. This is actually the first interview I've done on the book itself. Okay.
Wow. And in it, just one more thing before we go, because you mentioned that you mentored Gayle King. I'm waiting for her to make that phone call to you to say, Bruce, we want to interview you one of these mornings on CBS. But how did that relationship evolve?
Well, she was in our reporter trainee program shortly after I got here. She had graduated from the University of Maryland. She's a couple of years younger than me, and so she would just hang with me, and that's how it would work. I mean, we had a reporter trainee program. Again, that's something that no longer exists. The Max and Gordon Peterson, all of our other people started. And so we would have, like sometimes as many as 4 reporter trainees. And they would all gravitate to me because I was the youngest guy and I had the most exciting stories. I was in the streets all the time. And the socialization process, and that's where most of the teaching took place anyway. So at any rate, she came out of the program, and Un Yang also, who's at was in our reporter training program. And I could just go on and on and on, the number of people, that come through here and done well. But Gail got her first job, if not her second job, in Kansas City. She calls me one night. She's got to do a live shot on her first murder. And I'm getting ready to go anchor, the 11 o'clock news. And she's in a panic and she wants to know, what do I do? And I'm like, you have got to be kidding. So I said to her what my mentors would say to me. And it was simply, okay, Gail, time to grow up. Click. And I hung up. She tells that story. If I hear one
talking
more
about
time,
surviving deep waters.
absolutely right. So I was interviewing her a few years ago on CBS Morning News, and she brings up that story, of course.
Right.
And I said, you didn't finish the story though. I mean, did you do the live shot? How did it go? Oh yeah, I did the live shot. It went great. I said, you probably became their best reported live shots. Yeah, that's a good point. So why don't you tell that whole story? You owe me. Stop making stuff.
Yes.
So, but
Wow.
we've been friends for a long time. Long time.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to more of those interviews. I really appreciate you giving us this time, today, Bruce, and I feel honored to be the first to do an interview with you about the book. I'm looking forward to hearing much more about it. It sounds like writing is still in your blood, so I know that there are more books coming. So because you don't know how to retire. So having said that, I'm going to let you go now and just say thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Denise. Thanks a lot. Take care.
All right. You too.
Bye.
Where do you come to get